In the vast, unrelenting expanse of the 41st millennium, the Pariah Nexus stands as a chilling anomaly in a galaxy already rife with terror and mystery. A region unlike any other, its very presence warps reality, casting a dark shadow across the stars. To those who navigate the endless void, it is a realm shrouded in fear, a place where the laws of existence falter and unimaginable horrors await. At the heart of this nightmarish region lies a phenomenon that defies comprehension, the complete nullification of psychic energy. For Psykers, those gifted and cursed with the ability to channel the warp, this region is not just a challenge, it is a death sentence. Here, the very essence of what makes them unique is stripped away, leaving them vulnerable to the suffocating silence of the void. Yet, the Nexus is not just a danger to individuals. It is a strategic enigma that has drawn the attention of the galaxy's most powerful factions, each seeking to understand or exploit its secrets. Whispers of the Nexus's true nature ripple through the Imperium, carried by terrified survivors and grim reports from its outer edges. To some, it is a manifestation of divine will, a tool sent by higher powers to cleanse the galaxy of corruption. To others, it is a necron weapon, a harbinger of an ancient empire's resurgence. What is certain, however, is its unparalleled lethality to Psykers, whose abilities crumble in the face of its oppressive aura. The galaxy's countless wars have bred resilience and adaptation, but even the most seasoned warriors speak of the Nexus with hushed voices. To step into its borders is to confront a reality where the warp, source of both power and peril, has no influence. What remains is a hollow, sterile void, stripped of hope, ambition, and even the faintest spark of solace. It is a place where nightmares are given form, and Psykers are rendered powerless. Yet, for all its terror, the Pariah Nexus is also a source of insatiable curiosity. What forces forged such a monstrosity? What purpose does it serve, and what secrets does it guard? These questions haunt the minds of those who dare to ponder its existence. But for the Psykers who find themselves ensnared within its grasp, the answers may come too late. The stage is set for a tale of desperation, intrigue, and survival in the face of an unfathomable enemy. This is the Pariah Nexus, a crucible of suffering, a puzzle of unimaginable complexity, and a nightmare from which few escape. Let us now venture deeper into its mysteries, uncovering the players, the history, and the devastating impact of this dark chapter in the Warhammer 40k universe. The Pariah Nexus is a theater of unimaginable tension, where several factions, driven by vastly different motives, converge around a single horrifying reality. Each player, whether they are conquerors, defenders, or unwitting victims, holds a role that shapes the unfolding nightmare. At the core of this grim convergence are the Necrons, the ancient architects of the Nexus itself. Their empire, awakened from millennia of slumber, has unleashed a cold and calculated resurgence, and the Nexus represents one of their deadliest assets. The Necron dynasties involved wield unparalleled mastery over reality-bending technology, and the Pariah Nexus is the apex of their ambition, a vast zone imbued with the power to strip away the immaterial. The dynasties see this as not merely an instrument of conquest, but as a declaration that the material realm belongs to them alone. Opposing this dark resurrection is the Imperium of Man, a lumbering but determined juggernaut built on faith, tradition, and the relentless need for survival. Entire battle groups, including fleets of the Indomitus Crusade, have been deployed to halt the Necron advance and uncover the Nexus's mysteries. The Imperial military forces, comprising the might of the Astra Militarum, Adeptus Astartes, and the zealous warriors of the Adepta Sororitas, are united by their unbreakable creed, though even they falter in the face of the Nexus's power. Beyond their martial strength, the Imperium also fields agents of the Inquisition, seeking not just to defeat their enemies, but to dissect the Nexus itself for any potential heresies or truths about its origins. For them, the Nexus is not merely a battlefront, but a cosmic puzzle to be unraveled. Standing apart from the mechanized tides of war are the black ships, enigmatic vessels that traverse the stars, collecting Psykers for the Emperor's service or for their destruction. These somber harbingers of Imperial doctrine face an unprecedented dilemma within the Nexus, as their very cargo becomes a source of vulnerability rather than strength. Psykers, critical to the Imperium's survival, become powerless liabilities in the presence of the Nexus's nullifying influence, leaving the black ships more exposed than ever. On the other side of this grim conflict are the Necron cryptechs, masters of technological sorcery who are integral to maintaining the Nexus's dreadful properties. These figures act as architects of ruin, their expertise in manipulating reality forming the cornerstone of the Nexus's power. Alongside them, the Necron pariahs, soulless beings who radiate an anti-psychic field, become living embodiments of the terror the Nexus represents. Their presence alone is enough to drive even the most hardened Psyker into madness, reinforcing the sheer nightmare the Nexus imposes. Other factions are not mere spectators to this grim clash. The Adeptus Mechanicus, ever hungry for forbidden knowledge, views the Nexus as both a marvel and a blasphemy. To these techno-priests, the Necron technologies that sustain the Nexus are a dangerous temptation, one that could yield untold power or unleash catastrophic ruin. Their expeditions into the Nexus are often as reckless as they are ambitious, driven by a dogmatic belief that all technological relics must be catalogued, understood, and, if necessary, repurposed in the name of the Omnissiah. At the fringes of the Imperium's war machine are the isolated voices of those who have survived brief encounters with the Nexus. Rogue traders, desperate remnants of lost regiments, and scattered civilian vessels that stumble upon the Nexus's perimeter become unintended players in its unfolding tragedy. Some manage to escape with fragments of knowledge, whispered horrors that fuel paranoia and myth. Others are never heard from again, their fates swallowed whole by the Nexus's merciless expanse. Yet, even amid this war for survival, there are darker, opportunistic forces. Chaos, ever watchful for cracks in reality, regards the Nexus with a mixture of frustration and awe. The unnatural stillness of the Nexus repels the influence of the warp, a power that chaos thrives upon. This nullifying effect is an affront to their existence, but it also sparks fear and fascination among their ranks. While chaos demons cannot manifest within the Nexus, their mortal followers, the twisted warbands, are sometimes drawn toward its borders, seeking forbidden truths about how such a void can exist at all. The final and most overlooked participants are the Psykers themselves. Stripped of their lifeline to the warp, they become helpless against forces they would otherwise resist. For many, the Nexus represents not only death but erasure, an existence devoid of sensation, stripped of the very abilities that define them. Their stories are often ignored amid the larger galactic narratives of conquest and resistance, yet their suffering underscores the true horror of the Nexus. Whether they are Imperial-sanctioned Psykers, rogue warp-sensitive individuals, or newly discovered Psykers aboard black ships, they share a common fate: silence in a galaxy defined by the warp's noise. Together, these factions weave a grim tapestry of ambition, resilience, and ruin within the Pariah Nexus. Their motives vary, from conquest and survival to obsession and curiosity, but all are bound by the shadow of this lethal phenomenon. In this conflict, no actor emerges unscathed, for even those who come seeking victory are forced to reckon with the existential void that the Nexus represents. The emergence of the Pariah Nexus was not a random event, but the culmination of millennia of quiet machinations and shifting power dynamics within the galaxy. To understand how such a nightmare came into being, one must first examine the growing imbalance between the material universe and the immaterium. The Imperium's rampant expansion, its reliance on warp travel, and its dependence on Psykers to maintain communication across the stars steadily widened the rift between the two realms. As the warp became more volatile, the number of Psykers born across humanity increased exponentially, a trend that was both a blessing and a curse. While some Psykers became invaluable to the Imperium's survival, others were consumed by their powers, turning into catastrophic threats that could wipe out entire worlds. The Imperium's desperation to maintain control over these burgeoning psychic abilities led to harsher enforcement measures and greater reliance on the Black Ships, which scoured entire sectors in search of Psykers. This widespread harvesting of warp-sensitive individuals became necessary for the continued operation of the Astronomicon, the Emperor's great psychic beacon. However, this relentless expansion of psychic activity did not go unnoticed by the galaxy's oldest and most calculating minds, the Necrons. To them, the growing tides of psychic energy represented the single greatest threat to the stability of the material universe, which they had once fought to preserve from the corrupting influence of the Immaterium. Long before the first reports of the Pariah Nexus reached the Imperium's high command, the Necrons had foreseen a grim future where the Immaterium would overflow, drowning reality in chaos and ruin. The scars of the war in heaven, a conflict that had nearly shattered the galaxy eons ago, served as a haunting reminder of what unchecked psychic power could unleash. The Necrons had not forgotten the devastation wrought by their ancient enemies, and their leaders knew that history was repeating itself. The rise of powerful Psykers across the galaxy confirmed their worst fears, and for some of the Necron dynasties, there could be no other response than to act decisively and preemptively. The seeds of the Pariah Nexus were sown in this ancient dread, a dread reinforced by the resurgence of human Psykers and the rapid spread of chaos cults that worshipped the powers of the Immaterium. With each flare of psychic energy, the material realm grew weaker and the veil between dimensions thinned. The Necron cryptex, whose knowledge of reality manipulation surpassed anything mortal science could achieve, began devising a means to sever the Immaterium's influence entirely. These experiments gave rise to an array of technological horrors designed to suppress psychic resonance, and eventually, their research culminated in a breakthrough: the technology capable of creating an anti-psychic field so powerful that it could nullify the warp itself. The timing of the Nexus's creation coincided with a critical period for the Imperium, the early phases of the Indomitus Crusade. In the wake of the galaxy-wide upheaval caused by the Great Rift, the Imperium was fractured and vulnerable. Warp storms tore across vast swaths of space, isolating entire systems and rendering traditional forms of communication unreliable. Psykers who had once acted as living conduits between distant worlds were overwhelmed by the intensity of the warp's turbulence, and many succumbed to madness or spontaneous immolation. To the Imperium, this period was one of desperation. To the Necrons, it was an opportunity. Amid the chaos, Necron dynasties began launching precision strikes across the galaxy, targeting regions where the warp's influence was most unstable. These strikes were not just territorial conquests. They were surgical attempts to shut down psychic activity in key regions. While the Imperium scrambled to reinforce its borders, the Necrons quietly expanded their influence in the Pariah Nexus's vicinity, laying the groundwork for what would become a war against the very concept of psychic power. However, the technology used to create the Nexus did not merely emerge from academic research. It was forged in the context of war. The Necrons had refined their experiments on countless smaller worlds before the Nexus became what it is today. Entire planets, some once brimming with life, became hollow shells where psychic resonance ceased to exist. These test sites became the foundations of the Nexus's architecture, each contributing a fragment of the larger system that would soon engulf entire sectors. By the time the Imperium understood what was happening, the process was already in motion, and the war for control over this region became inevitable. The escalation toward open conflict was further fueled by the Imperium's growing suspicions regarding the Necrons' true intentions. Reports of entire planets falling silent without warning began to circulate among Imperial commanders. Some believed these worlds had been consumed by chaos, while others feared an alien menace too advanced to comprehend. Whatever the cause, the result was always the same: worlds devoid of psychic activity, their populations reduced to lifeless automatons or unresponsive masses. The psychological toll on Imperial forces was immense, as even the bravest soldiers were shaken by the unnatural stillness that overtook these regions. Thus, the stage was set for a confrontation born out of fear, desperation, and ancient vendettas. The Necrons' relentless march toward eliminating psychic corruption clashed with the Imperium's desperate need to preserve its few remaining lifelines to the Astronomicon and the Warp. The Pariah Nexus did not appear in a vacuum. It was the product of an ancient grudge against the Immaterium, fueled by the catastrophic rise of warp-tainted forces and the Imperium's fragile reliance on Psykers to sustain its crumbling empire. What began as an attempt to safeguard the material realm spiraled into a grim campaign where reality itself became a battlefield. The events surrounding the Pariah Nexus unfolded in a series of brutal phases, each one pushing the galaxy deeper into uncertainty and fear. At first, the phenomenon emerged in scattered whispers, with isolated reports of entire systems falling into eerie silence. Imperial fleets sent to investigate found worlds devoid of psychic activity, and their inhabitants unnervingly subdued, their will seemingly drained. Initial attempts to recover these systems ended in failure, as reinforcements either vanished or returned, with conflicting accounts of lifeless cities and strange metallic constructs patrolling the ruins. The first formal recognition of the Nexus as a significant threat came when the fleets of the Indomitus Crusade encountered their first major resistance in this region. Fleet commanders, hardened by years of battle, found themselves facing a foe who wielded an unprecedented advantage. Attempts to establish forward operating bases were met with devastating counterattacks from Necron legions, who seemed intimately familiar with Imperial strategies. But the real horror became apparent when Psykers embedded within these Crusade forces began to falter. Astropaths, sanctioned Psykers, and even those wielding relics designed to shield their minds became incapacitated, their powers failing in unison. What began as confusion quickly escalated into a crisis. Recognizing the mounting losses, Imperial Command ordered a retreat from several key sectors, hoping to regroup and reassess their strategy. However, withdrawing from the Nexus proved to be as perilous as engaging with it directly. Necron warships emerged from hidden structures, cutting off escape routes and isolating Imperial battalions. With warp-based communication severely disrupted, desperate pleas for reinforcement often went unanswered, leaving isolated regiments to face annihilation. It was during this stage that the Imperium learned a painful truth. The deeper one advanced into the Nexus, the less reliable their means of retreat became. As Imperial forces scrambled for solutions, the Necrons accelerated their campaign, expanding the borders of the Nexus with terrifying efficiency. Key star systems surrounding the central void began to fall in rapid succession. Planetary defenses, once thought impenetrable, crumbled as Necron legions exploited the weakened resolve of defenders bereft of psychic support. Resistance efforts were hampered not only by the overwhelming firepower of the Necrons, but by the psychological effects of the Nexus itself. Commanders reported that their Psykers became lethargic, plagued by hallucinations or crippling fear. Entire companies who had previously withstood the horrors of chaos found themselves paralyzed by an existential dread unlike anything they had experienced. In response, the Imperium attempted to fortify its positions outside the Nexus's expanding borders, deploying advanced fortresses and specialized legions trained to resist psychic nullification. These efforts achieved some initial success in delaying Necron advances, but at great cost. Some defensive lines held long enough for Imperial reinforcements to arrive, though many others collapsed under relentless Necron offensives. Each hard-fought battle exposed new challenges as the Necrons adapted their tactics, often deploying anti-warp constructs that further destabilized Imperial strategies. A pivotal moment in the campaign occurred when an entire fleet of black ships entered the Nexus in an attempt to evacuate Psykers trapped in besieged worlds. The mission was meant to demonstrate that the Imperium could still protect its own, even in the face of unparalleled odds. However, the result was catastrophic. As the black ships crossed deeper into the region, their passengers, powerful Psykers trained for resilience, began to convulse, their connection to the warp severed so violently that many succumbed within hours. Without their psychic defenses, the ship's crews were overwhelmed, leaving entire vessels adrift and defenseless. The few survivors who managed to escape described the experience as akin to drowning in silence. This disaster prompted an escalation in the war effort. The Imperium, unwilling to accept defeat, began launching retaliatory strikes aimed at disrupting the Nexus's core infrastructure. These missions targeted known necron installations, with elite squads deployed to disable or destroy key nodes believed to control the nullifying effect. While some of these missions succeeded, they came at a terrible price. Strike teams often suffered heavy casualties due to the disorienting effects of the Nexus. Psyker-reliant strategies that had previously been effective against xenos forces failed spectacularly, as the warp-reliant weaponry and psychic protections simply ceased to function. This forced Imperial tacticians to rethink their entire approach, leading to the implementation of more conventional warfare tactics centered on firepower and attrition. Meanwhile, the Necrons continued to expand their operations, bolstering the Nexus with additional anti-psychic constructs and planetary installations. Their methods appeared to follow a grim pattern. Once a system was fully consumed by the Nexus's influence, the population either fell into an emotionless stupor or vanished altogether. The sheer scale of this operation hinted at a meticulous plan millennia in the making, one designed to methodically unmake the influence of the warp across entire regions of space. Amid the chaos, rumors began to circulate among Imperial forces regarding strange disappearances of entire fleets near the outer edges of the Nexus. These unconfirmed reports fueled speculation that the Necrons had perfected methods of capturing or destroying ships before they could flee. While some viewed these stories as the result of wartime paranoia, others believed that the Nexus was capable of more than just suppressing psychic power. It could sever the very fabric of reality itself. As the Pariah Nexus grew in both size and deadliness, it became clear that the traditional strategies of the Imperium were insufficient to halt its advance. Each phase of the conflict exposed deeper layers of the Nexus's devastating potential, turning it from a regional threat into a phenomenon that reshaped the war efforts of an entire galactic empire. What had once been seen as a troubling anomaly became a full-scale catastrophe that tested the limits of Imperial resolve and forced them to confront a terrifying truth. The Nexus was not just a battlefield. It was a manifestation of something far beyond their understanding. The defining turning point in the conflict surrounding the Pariah Nexus came with the discovery of the Nexus Anchors, enormous necron constructs buried deep beneath several key worlds within the affected region. These massive obelisks, pulsing with dark energy, were identified as the mechanisms responsible for amplifying the null field effect that rendered Psykers powerless. This revelation shifted the war from a defensive effort to a desperate mission to strike at the heart of the Necron operation. The breakthrough came after a high-risk reconnaissance mission conducted by a coalition of Imperial specialists. Despite the oppressive silence of the Nexus, a small detachment of scouts managed to infiltrate one of the affected systems and transmit fragmented data back to Imperial High Command before their signal was lost. The data revealed the presence of these immense structures, hidden beneath layers of defense grids and cloaked by intricate necron technology. With this intelligence in hand, the Imperium formulated a bold plan to disable or destroy the Nexus Anchors and disrupt the null field long enough to regain some measure of control over the region. The mission was unprecedented in its ambition. It called for coordinated assaults on multiple fronts, with elite strike teams tasked with descending into the fortified subterranean labyrinths where the Nexus Anchors were housed. These strike teams were composed of veteran warriors, engineers, and demolitions experts, each chosen for their resilience and experience. However, the most critical component of the operation involved a controversial decision to send in specialized Psykers despite the immense danger posed to them. The plan hinged on the possibility that even a brief reactivation of psychic potential, however fleeting, could create a ripple effect strong enough to weaken the Necron grip on the surrounding systems. One of the key missions was directed at a world codenamed Colossi, where the largest known Nexus anchor had been identified. The assault began with a brutal orbital siege, as Imperial fleets targeted the Necron planetary defenses in a coordinated barrage designed to draw attention away from the insertion teams. Under the cover of this bombardment, transports carrying elite forces descended toward the surface. They faced immediate resistance from Necron phalanxes, whose deadly precision and sheer numbers turned the battlefield into a nightmarish gauntlet. Despite the overwhelming odds, the insertion teams pressed forward, navigating through collapsed ruins and treacherous metallic corridors to reach the entrance to the anchor's chamber. Once inside, they encountered a sight that defied logic, an immense obelisk surrounded by an intricate web of glowing pylons, each emitting pulses that reverberated through the atmosphere like a heartbeat. The air itself felt heavy, sapping the strength of the attackers and dulling their senses. The Psykers within the team, though weakened, attempted to channel their remaining energy toward disrupting the structure's field. For a fleeting moment, their efforts bore fruit. The null field flickered, causing nearby Necron constructs to momentarily falter. It was in that brief window that the demolitions teams placed their charges. As the charges detonated, a deafening wave of force surged outward, shattering the pylon network and causing the anchor to destabilize. The resulting explosion created a shockwave of anti-psychic feedback that spread across the surrounding region, momentarily lifting the veil of silence. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, astropathic signals from the region pierced the void, and Imperial forces across nearby systems seized the opportunity to launch coordinated offensives. However, the victory came at an unimaginable cost. The destruction of the Colossi anchor triggered a catastrophic chain reaction within the subterranean chamber. The energy released as the anchor collapsed tore through the surrounding landscape, consuming everything in its wake. Entire battalions were lost in the aftermath, their sacrifice becoming a somber testament to the lengths the Imperium was willing to go to reclaim the stars. The destruction of the first Nexus anchor marked a critical shift in the war. While it did not dismantle the Pariah Nexus entirely, it proved that the Necron constructs were not invulnerable. The realization that the null field could be disrupted, even temporarily, reignited a sense of purpose among the beleaguered Imperial forces. However, it also revealed the terrible cost of such operations, not just in lives lost, but in the toll it took on morale and resources. The destruction of Colossi served as both a triumph and a grim warning. The path to dismantling the Nexus would be paved with devastation. In the aftermath of this event, Necron forces intensified their efforts to defend the remaining Nexus anchors, reinforcing their positions with new defensive measures and deploying more advanced war constructs. Meanwhile, the Imperium faced a sobering decision, whether to continue their high-risk strikes or seek an alternative means of weakening the Nexus's influence. The debate among Imperial commanders became heated, as some argued that the destruction of even one anchor justified further assaults, while others feared that the cost was too great to sustain. The turning point at Colossi also sent shockwaves beyond the immediate war front. For those who had witnessed the brief reprieve from the null field, it was a fleeting glimpse of what victory could look like. Yet for the Psykers who survived the operation, the experience was marked by profound trauma. Many never recovered from the psychic backlash, their minds shattered by the overwhelming feedback that accompanied the anchor's destruction. Those who did survive found their abilities permanently diminished, haunted by the memory of silence. This singular event reshaped the strategies of both the Imperium and the Necrons, as each side recalibrated its approach to the conflict. The Imperium's forces became emboldened, believing that their enemies were not as untouchable as they seemed. The Necrons, in turn, became more methodical and ruthless, recognizing the vulnerability exposed by the anchor's destruction. The galaxy watched as the war for the Pariah Nexus entered a new and bloodier phase, driven by the echoes of Colossi's fall. The Pariah Nexus left a profound and immediate impact on the fabric of the galaxy, sending ripples of change across countless star systems and forever altering the balance of power. The Null Field's encroachment reshaped the very nature of interstellar conflict, forcing entire factions to reassess their strategies in ways they had never imagined. For the Imperium of Man, the effects were catastrophic yet paradoxically galvanizing. Communication lines that had relied on astropathic relays were severed, plunging entire sectors into isolation. Planets that once thrived as centers of trade and military coordination fell silent, their Psykers rendered helpless as their connection to the warp disintegrated. What had previously been complex, coordinated military responses to Necron offensives devolved into isolated skirmishes as Imperial forces struggled to maintain cohesion. In sectors adjacent to the Nexus, the spread of fear and misinformation led to widespread unrest. Civilian populations, already living under the constant shadow of xenos invasions and warp storms, now faced an inexplicable silence from worlds that had been bastions of strength. Entire colonies abandoned their posts, while others resorted to mass purges out of fear that their Psykers might be harboring unknown corruptions. Faith in the Emperor's protection wavered in some regions as ecclesiarchal leaders grappled with the inability to explain the sheer scale of the phenomenon. Even the most devout believers were shaken by the notion that the Imperium's psychic might could be extinguished so easily. Beyond its direct military and societal repercussions, the Pariah Nexus became a breeding ground for existential dread that transcended physical boundaries. Imperial records describe how the loss of psychic resonance in affected areas did more than nullify powers. It disrupted the very core of what made humanity resilient in the face of cosmic horrors. The warp, for all its malevolent dangers, was also a source of inspiration and resolve for many Psykers who wielded their gifts in service to humanity. Stripped of this connection, they experienced a profound emptiness that spread through their ranks like a disease. Entire cadres of Psykers, who had once formed the backbone of astropathic communication networks and psychic defense lines, became liabilities. Some simply collapsed into unconsciousness, while others descended into irreversible catatonia or madness. The Necron influence extended well beyond Imperial space. Other galactic powers, though less reliant on the warp than the Imperium, felt the effects in different but equally devastating ways. The Aldari, whose lives and fates are inextricably tied to the Immaterium, were particularly vulnerable. The Nexus field sapped the life force of their seers and farseers, severing their precognitive visions and leaving entire craft worlds blind to the movements of their enemies. For a race already clinging to survival, the loss of their ability to foresee the future turned precision-based strategies into dangerous gambles. Stories spread of Aldari, strike forces vanishing in their entirety after attempting to scout the Nexus, their fates unknown but assumed grim. The void left by the suppression of the warp also had unforeseen consequences for species who rely on more subtle forms of warp interaction. Rogue traders and independent explorers who operated on the fringes of Imperial space found their livelihoods threatened by the lack of warp stability in regions near the Nexus. Navigation through those zones became increasingly treacherous, and warp storms seemed to grow more erratic as the natural ebb and flow of warp tides was disrupted. Trade routes that had been lifelines to fringe colonies became inaccessible, leading to economic collapses and further isolation. Reports surfaced of entire convoys vanishing without a trace after attempting to bypass the Nexus's influence, fueling speculation that the void created by the Necron technology extended beyond mere suppression. It may have been warping the very fabric of space itself. Meanwhile, Chaos warbands, whose strategies and very existence depend on the Immaterium, found themselves at an impasse. For the first time in millennia, warp-borne incursions into the affected regions ceased entirely. To the Imperium, this was a small but bitter consolation. One of the only zones where demonic incursions could not manifest was one they could not control. The Chaos Gods, who feed on the emotions and psychic turbulence of mortals, were effectively blind in the heart of the Nexus. However, this absence of their influence created its own strange consequences. Warbands that relied on infernal guidance found themselves rudderless, driven to paranoia and infighting. Some cult leaders interpreted the Nexus as a cosmic punishment, while others believed it to be a sign of some new and terrible force that transcended even the powers of the warp. In contrast, the Tyranids and Orcs, who have minimal reliance on the warp, seemed largely unaffected by the null fields. Yet their limited interaction with the Nexus zones suggested an almost instinctual aversion to the silence. Tyranid fleets approaching the peripheries of the Nexus appeared to change course without explanation, as though compelled to avoid the region altogether. Similarly, Orc warbands, known for their eagerness to engage any foe, rarely ventured deep into the Nexus-controlled areas unless dragged there through circumstance. This absence of typical aggression from such feral species only deepened the mystery surrounding the true nature of the Pariah Nexus's influence. The impact of the Nexus also reverberated through the Imperium's inner sanctums. High-ranking officials within the Inquisition, the Adeptus Mechanicus, and even the Ecclesiarchy began to voice conflicting theories regarding the ultimate goal of the Necron operation. Some feared that the Nexus was merely a precursor to something far greater, a testbed for technology that could one day sweep across the entire galaxy, silencing the warp in its entirety. This speculation led to a growing paranoia that infiltrated the highest levels of command, with factions clashing over how best to respond. Should the Imperium launch a massive counter-invasion, despite the unprecedented risks, or focus on reinforcing nearby sectors to prevent further expansion? The debate only intensified as more worlds succumbed to the Nexus's influence. The immediate fallout from the Nexus's expansion was clear. Entire sectors plunged into silence, Psykers reduced to helplessness, and vital interstellar routes rendered impassable. Yet, the psychological impact was equally devastating. The sheer idea that psychic abilities, the very tools that had shaped human progress and defense for millennia, could be neutralized so completely forced humanity to confront a terrifying possibility. That their mastery of the warp, once considered their greatest weapon, could also be their greatest vulnerability. The galaxy's countless factions were left to reckon with the Nexus's implications, not only as a military and strategic threat, but as an existential reminder that the foundations of their power could be undone by ancient forces. For Psykers, the Nexus became a symbol of doom, an enduring reminder that even their gifts could be turned into chains in a war where silence itself had become a weapon. The Pariah Nexus is steeped in phenomena and technological enigmas that make it one of the most terrifying and perplexing regions of the galaxy, particularly for Psykers. One of the most hotly debated and enigmatic aspects of the Nexus is its connection to the Khitan, shattered fragments of ancient star gods that the Necrons once served and later enslaved. The pervasive anti-psychic field within the Nexus is often theorized to be a byproduct of technology derived from the Khitan known as the Void Dragon, whose nature is intrinsically tied to the suppression of warp energies. Fans of Warhammer lore frequently speculate whether the Necron's mastery of null fields originates directly from the remains of this particular Khitan, or whether they have refined this technology over millennia to create something more terrifyingly precise. The Nexus technology operates on principles far beyond the understanding of Imperial science. The pylons and monolithic structures found within the Nexus are not merely physical constructs. They are built using exotic materials that seem to resonate on a frequency imperceptible to the human mind. This resonance has led to theories that the Nexus's null field isn't simply an anti-warp measure, but a fundamental reconfiguration of reality itself, designed to sever the Immaterium's connection to the material realm at a subatomic level. The materials used in these constructs have baffled even the most seasoned tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Scans often return contradictory data, showing that the structures are simultaneously solid, liquid, and energy depending on the methods of observation used. Another chilling feature often discussed is the sensory impact of the Nexus on those who enter it. The field doesn't merely strip Psykers of their abilities. It warps perception on a deeply personal level. Imperial soldiers and officers who survived brief incursions into the Nexus describe an overwhelming sense of apathy that seeps into their thoughts, making even basic decision-making feel laborious and meaningless. Psykers, on the other hand, often describe a far more terrifying experience, one where they feel as though a core part of their identity has been ripped away, leaving behind a hollow shell incapable of feeling hope or fear. This emotional suppression has led many to wonder if the Nexus doesn't just suppress the warp, but also targets the soul itself. Perhaps one of the most disturbing questions about the Nexus is its relationship with the Necron Pariahs, soulless beings who act as living extensions of the null field. Pariahs are believed to possess what has been dubbed the Blanks gene, a genetic anomaly that renders them immune to psychic influence while projecting an aura of unease and revulsion. The presence of pariahs within the Nexus amplifies its effects, creating zones of absolute silence where no psychic energy can survive. Discussions among the fan community often speculate that the Necrons are actively attempting to weaponize and mass-produce pariahs, turning their genetic anomaly into an army of living anti-warp weapons. This raises horrifying implications for Psykers, who would not only be powerless, but could also find themselves hunted by beings whose mere existence causes them unbearable mental agony. Another unique aspect of the Nexus's influence lies in its impact on time and perception of reality. Reports from expedition teams and battlefield recordings suggest that the flow of time within the Nexus is not uniform. Some accounts indicate that minutes outside the field correspond to days or even weeks for those trapped within. This temporal dissonance adds another layer of terror for Psykers, who often rely on their heightened senses to predict and respond to threats. The inability to trust their own perception of time can lead to fatal mistakes as tactical plans dissolve into chaos. This warping of time has sparked debate among both Imperial strategists and fans alike, with some positing that the Nexus may be a prototype for an even larger reality-altering construct. A particularly grim point of fascination centers around the concept of psychic echoes within the Nexus. Though the null field is designed to erase warp resonance, some reports claim that faint psychic imprints, fragments of memories, screams, or last thoughts can still be perceived by those sensitive enough. These echoes are not active entities, but rather lingering remnants of Psykers whose minds were obliterated by the Nexus's influence. These fragments have no sentience, but are said to replay in endless loops, haunting the ruins of consumed worlds. This phenomenon has led to theories that the Necron technology doesn't merely sever the link to the warp, but violently disrupts it, scattering pieces of psychic consciousness like static across reality. Perhaps the most contentious topic surrounding the Nexus is the question of its long-term purpose. While it clearly serves as a weapon against the warp, many believe it may be part of a far grander Necron agenda, a precursor to a galaxy-wide anti-warp network. Fans frequently debate whether the Pariah Nexus is simply a regional experiment or the prototype for an eventual campaign to remove all psychic influence from the galaxy permanently. The implications of such a network would be devastating, as it would eliminate not only chaos incursions, but also the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that guides warp travel for humanity. This possibility has sparked intense discussions about whether the Necrons are acting out of a desire to reclaim their empire, or if they see themselves as galactic custodians seeking to purify the material realm from what they view as dangerous corruption. The Nexus has also introduced a more philosophical aspect to the ongoing conflict in the Warhammer universe. If the null field technology were ever replicated by the Imperium or other factions, it would fundamentally change the nature of warfare. The idea of a galaxy where psychic powers and the very presence of the warp are permanently neutralized raises questions about the identity and survival of many species, particularly humanity, whose fate has always been intertwined with the immaterium. Some fans argue that a world without the warp would be a blessing, while others see it as a loss of what makes the universe alive, albeit terrifyingly so. In the end, the unique horrors of the Pariah Nexus extend beyond its ability to render Psykers helpless. It is a place where the natural laws of the galaxy are rewritten, a grim reminder that, in the grim darkness of the far future, even the very fabric of reality can be unmade by the cold calculations of an ancient empire bent on erasing the immaterial from existence. Within the dark saga of the Pariah Nexus, a select few individuals have left an indelible mark on its unfolding narrative, embodying the hopes, fears, and ambitions of their factions. These figures, whether heroes, commanders, or enigmatic masterminds, have become symbols of resilience, obsession, and tragedy in a war where reality itself bends under the weight of ancient power. At the forefront of the Imperial response stands Lord Solar Arcadion Threx, a seasoned strategist who rose to prominence during the early stages of the Indomitus Crusade. Threx is known for his unparalleled ability to adapt to unpredictable battlefields and for his strict adherence to maintaining morale among his troops. However, the Pariah Nexus tested him in ways no battlefield ever had. With communication networks crippled and Psykers reduced to liabilities, Threx was forced to devise unorthodox strategies that relied solely on conventional warfare. His reputation as a steady and unbreakable leader became both his strength and his weakness. He refused to retreat even when entire regiments were consumed by the silence of the Nexus. Some saw him as an icon of defiance, while others criticized his unwillingness to abandon lost ground, labeling his tactics as reckless in the face of the Necrons' overwhelming technological superiority. Threx's most defining trait is his unshakable belief in humanity's right to endure, even against cosmic forces beyond comprehension. Yet, this belief blinds him to the full horror of the Nexus's anti-psychic capabilities. His reliance on human grit and ingenuity has led to victories that defy reason, but it also leaves him vulnerable to the more insidious psychological effects of the Nexus. The further he pushes his forces into null space, the more his own grasp on reality seems to fray, with whispers spreading among his closest advisors that even Threx's steely resolve may not withstand the soul-crushing void of the Nexus for much longer. Another pivotal figure is High Magos Zephyra Kol Medran, a senior member of the Adeptus Mechanicus who has devoted her life to understanding the mysteries of necron technology. Kol Medran's fascination with the null field phenomenon borders on obsession, and her willingness to push ethical boundaries has made her both revered and feared within her order. She believes that the Pariah Nexus holds the key to unraveling the fabric of reality itself and views the suppression of psychic resonance as a potential tool for humanity's ultimate victory over chaos. However, her pursuit of knowledge has led her to make decisions that some consider dangerously close to heresy. Kol Medran's analytical mind and deep understanding of xenotech have enabled her to devise countermeasures against the necron null fields, albeit with limited success. Yet, her singular focus on scientific discovery renders her blind to the emotional and spiritual devastation wrought by the Nexus. She views Psykers as flawed instruments rather than individuals, often dismissing their suffering as collateral damage in the grand pursuit of knowledge. Her detachment has caused friction with Imperial commanders who must balance tactical necessity with the human cost of her experiments. Despite this, Kol Medran remains indispensable to the war effort, as her insights into necron architecture have provided the Imperium with its only footholds in the region. Among the Necrons, Overlord Jakiran, the Silent Warden, is the undisputed architect of the Nexus's expansion. Known for his methodical precision and unyielding will, Jakiran is a master of warfare, not through brute strength, but through the careful orchestration of fear and inevitability. Unlike other Necron leaders driven by territorial ambition or personal glory, Jacairon's motivations are purely ideological. He sees the suppression of psychic energy as a necessity for restoring balance to the galaxy, a final solution to the chaos brought about by the warp. His disdain for anything connected to the Immaterium borders on revulsion, and he has committed untold resources to perfecting the anti-warp constructs that define the Nexus. Jacairon's greatest strength is his patience. He does not rush into conflict, nor does he waste resources on unnecessary displays of dominance. Every movement of his legions is calculated to tighten the Nexus's grip on reality. However, this meticulous nature can also be exploited. His obsession with precision leaves him reluctant to adapt to unforeseen variables, such as acts of unpredictable bravery or sabotage that defy logical probability. Yet, even his rare failures do little to diminish his overarching goal, to spread the void of the Nexus across the stars, one system at a time. One of the more tragic figures associated with the Pariah Nexus is Althan Var, a sanctioned Psyker who became a symbol of resilience during the earliest battles in the region. Once a celebrated astropath renowned for his unbreakable will, Var's experiences within the Nexus shattered his connection to the warp and left him an empty husk of his former self. Yet, rather than succumb to despair, he became an emblem of defiance for the Imperial forces. He continued to serve on the front lines, using what remained of his psychic intuition to guide and inspire his comrades, despite being unable to channel the warp. Var's resilience is both a strength and a source of immense suffering. Without the psychic senses that once defined him, he feels like a shadow of his former self, driven purely by duty. His story became a rallying cry for soldiers facing the void's silence, a reminder that even those who have lost everything to the Nexus can still fight. However, his presence is also a grim reminder of the Nexus's cost. Some question whether Var's determination is an act of courage or denial as he pushes himself further into the heart of the conflict, seemingly unconcerned by the toll it takes on his mind and body. Each of these individuals reflects a different facet of the conflict within the Pariah Nexus: the strategist who refuses to yield despite impossible odds, the scientist whose thirst for knowledge risks consuming her humanity, the overlord whose vision for the galaxy leaves no room for compromise, and the Psyker who endures the unimaginable. Their actions, strengths, and flaws have shaped the course of this grim war, leaving behind legacies intertwined with both triumph and tragedy. The Nexus has become not just a battlefield, but a crucible where the ideals and weaknesses of its key figures are laid bare, testing their limits in ways that transcend mere physical conflict. The Pariah Nexus is rife with unanswered questions and speculative theories that have captivated both scholars of the Imperium and the Warhammer 40k fan community. Despite years of battle and study, the true nature of the Nexus remains shrouded in uncertainty, and many of its most troubling aspects continue to fuel heated debates. Among these mysteries is the origin and extent of the technology that powers the null field. While most assume it is the work of Necron cryptechs, some believe it may stem from knowledge that predates even the Necron civilization itself. There are whispers of a long-lost Chitan shard, whose powers were harnessed in ways the galaxy has yet to fully comprehend. Whether this is true or simply the result of fear-driven speculation remains a contentious topic. One of the most frequently discussed mysteries is whether the Nexus represents a localized anomaly or the first step in a larger galactic purge. Many within the Imperium fear that the Pariah Nexus may be a prototype for a much grander Necron plan, an interconnected network of null fields capable of enveloping entire sectors of the galaxy. Such a network would effectively sever the warp's influence across vast distances, rendering the Imperium's reliance on warp travel and astropathic communication useless. This raises the question of whether the Nexus is simply a demonstration of the Necrons' ultimate intent to reshape the galaxy in their image, stripped of psychic resonance and free of immaterium-born corruption. This theory has led to intense debates about whether such a scenario is even possible, or if the Nexus is an isolated occurrence tied specifically to a particular Necron dynasty's ambitions. A particularly haunting question revolves around the fate of Psykers who vanish within the Nexus. Official reports often list them as lost to null space, but no one truly knows what happens to their minds or souls when their connection to the warp is severed so abruptly. Some suggest that their consciousness simply ceases to exist, while others believe that fragments of their psychic essence are trapped in a liminal state between reality and the warp. This theory has led to speculation that the Nexus may act as a prison of sorts, capturing stray threads of psychic energy and dispersing them in ways that defy conventional understanding. If true, the implications are grim, not only for Psykers, but for the fate of the soul itself, raising concerns about whether the Nexus nullifies existence at a metaphysical level. Another divisive topic is the potential relationship between the Nexus and the infamous Blackstone fortresses, massive constructs of unknown origin that have long been associated with anti-warp properties. Some theorists posit that the necron technology found within the Nexus was derived from these ancient fortresses, suggesting a possible connection between the two. Others argue that the Nexus represents a wholly unique development in Necron design, separate from the mysteries of Blackstone entirely. This debate continues to spark questions about the true purpose of Blackstone and whether it was a precursor to the nullification technology or a parallel creation designed by entirely different hands. The idea that multiple ancient civilizations may have sought to suppress or control the warp independently adds further complexity to the conversation. One of the more controversial theories concerns the idea that the Nexus's null field may not be entirely artificial. Some speculate that the Necrons discovered a naturally occurring phenomenon, a tear or rift in the immaterial fabric of the galaxy, and harnessed it for their own ends. Proponents of this theory point to the erratic behavior of warp storms and the unusual absence of certain types of psychic disturbances near the Nexus as evidence that something deeper is at play. If the Nexus was built around an existing void in the warp, it could explain the sheer scale and power of the null field, but it also raises unsettling questions about what forces might have caused such a void in the first place. Perhaps the most disturbing theory revolves around the potential for sentient evolution within the necron constructs that form the Nexus. Some reports suggest that the pylons and obelisks have exhibited self-repair capabilities and adaptive behavior beyond even the expected programming of necron technology. This has led to speculation that the null field generators could be partially autonomous or even imbued with fragments of conscious will. While there is no confirmed evidence of this, the possibility that the Nexus's core systems might evolve or expand independently is a chilling thought, especially for those who believe the Necrons themselves may not fully control what they have created. A more philosophical debate concerns the very purpose of psychic suppression and whether the Necrons view it as a form of purification rather than destruction. Some suggest that the Nexus is not meant solely as a weapon, but as a means of achieving a vision of cosmic order devoid of the unpredictability introduced by the warp. This theory has sparked discussions about whether the Necrons' ultimate goal could ever be reconciled with the survival of any warp-sensitive species, or whether they see all life influenced by the warp as inherently flawed and worthy of eradication. The moral implications of this theory divide even those loyal to the Imperium, as some argue that if the Necrons' technology could be harnessed safely, it could theoretically be used to protect entire sectors from chaos corruption. However, others warn that even entertaining such ideas is heretical and plays directly into the Necrons' hands. There is also the enduring question of why certain non-Psykers appear unaffected by the emotional apathy caused by the Nexus. While it is clear that Psykers are the primary targets of the null field's effects, many accounts suggest that the psychological impact extends to non-Psykers as well, though to a lesser degree. Yet there are rare instances where individuals have reported feeling nothing at all, No dread, no apathy, only clarity and calm. This anomaly has fueled speculation that some humans may possess a latent form of the genetic trait associated with pariahs, raising the possibility of an untapped evolutionary potential within humanity itself. If true, this could have profound implications for how the Imperium views its own genetic heritage and its potential future in a galaxy where psychic powers are both a blessing and a curse. Finally, the question remains whether the Nexus itself is a warning rather than a weapon. Some believe that the Necrons' actions may be a preemptive strike against an impending catastrophe they have foreseen, a collapse of the material realm under the weight of psychic corruption. If this theory holds any truth, it suggests that the Nexus is not only an instrument of control, but also a desperate attempt to prevent a future disaster. This notion complicates the already grim narrative of the Nexus, reframing the Necron effort as something more than a coldly calculated conquest. Whether this is a desperate attempt to preserve the galaxy, or simply another chapter in an ancient war of annihilation, remains an open question, but it has left the Imperium and its scholars haunted by the possibility that, despite their losses, they may still not fully grasp the true stakes of the Nexus conflict. The long-term consequences of the Pariah Nexus stretch far beyond the immediate devastation it has wrought. The galaxy's fate may be irreversibly altered depending on how this phenomenon continues to unfold. For the Imperium, the Nexus represents more than just a territorial loss. It has forced a paradigm shift in the understanding of warfare, survival, and humanity's place in a cosmos shaped by both the material and the immaterial. The suppression of psychic abilities at such a massive scale has created existential uncertainties, and it is clear that the ramifications of this null field technology will extend for millennia, whether the Nexus is contained or allowed to grow unchecked. One of the most immediate long-term effects is the profound re-evaluation of humanity's reliance on Psykers and the warp. The Imperium has always viewed Psykers as both a vital resource and a dangerous liability. However, the Pariah Nexus has laid bare the precariousness of this dependence. If the warp can be severed entirely, then the Imperium's most fundamental institutions, such as the Astronomicon and the Black Ships, could be rendered obsolete in regions affected by similar technology. This has fueled debates within the highest levels of Imperial command regarding the future of warp-based systems. Should such null fields expand, the Imperium could face the logistical nightmare of needing to develop entirely new methods of interstellar travel and communication, or risk entire sectors being cut off permanently. The psychological aftermath of the Nexus is another long-lasting consequence that cannot be ignored. The Imperium is held together as much by belief as by force, and the silence of the Nexus has shaken even the most faithful. The loss of psychic support has eroded the trust soldiers place in astropaths and sanctioned Psykers, creating a rift within the Imperial ranks. Long after the battles in the Nexus end, the trauma experienced by Psykers, who felt their very souls unravel, may result in permanent cultural stigmatization. Psykers who survive encounters with the Nexus might be seen as broken or unreliable, further marginalizing an already vulnerable population. In a worst-case scenario, this distrust could lead to purges or revolts against sanctioned Psykers, deepening the Imperium's internal divisions. Conversely, there are those within the Imperium who view the Nexus as a grim revelation of potential salvation. Some radical thinkers speculate that mastering the technology that nullifies the warp could free humanity from the constant threat of chaos. If entire sectors could be insulated from demonic incursions, the Imperium could focus its military might against more tangible foes. However, this view is fraught with ethical and practical dilemmas. The suppression of psychic energy would not only eliminate the threat of chaos, but also extinguish the light of the Astronomicon, potentially rendering humanity adrift in a galaxy without guidance. Additionally, many believe that tampering with such alien technology is tantamount to heresy, risking contamination at the hands of necron designs that humanity may never fully comprehend. For the Necrons, the success or failure of the Pariah Nexus could determine the trajectory of their resurgence. If the Nexus continues to expand, it could signify the dawn of a new era of Necron dominance, one where the immaterium is systematically stripped away from vast swaths of the galaxy. This vision of a cold, orderly cosmos is precisely what some Necron dynasties have sought for countless millennia. Yet, even within Necron ranks, there is speculation regarding the long-term viability of maintaining such vast null fields. The sheer energy required to sustain the Nexus raises questions about its efficiency and whether the Necrons can withstand the attrition of prolonged conflict with a determined Imperium. Should they overextend, they risk opening vulnerabilities that rival factions, both Xenos and Imperial, could exploit. The broader galactic balance is also at stake. The Eldar, who rely on their psychic gifts to foresee and avoid catastrophe, may find themselves increasingly blind in the face of null field proliferation. This could lead to the extinction of entire craft worlds, as their ability to predict and evade their enemies is nullified. The webway, long considered a refuge from the perils of the warp, may become a prison if key routes are compromised by expanding null fields. Meanwhile, chaos warbands and demonic forces, long seen as unstoppable, could find themselves contained or even wiped out in regions affected by the Nexus. However, this containment would come at a terrible price. Should the balance tip too far, the galaxy may enter an era devoid of any psychic potential, fundamentally reshaping the nature of life itself. The Pariah Nexus has also sparked a dangerous arms race. If the Imperium and its enemies seek to replicate or counteract Necron nullification technology, the next phase of galactic warfare could shift from an arms race of sheer firepower to one centered around control of the warp itself. Xenos factions such as the Tau, known for their technological ingenuity, may see the Nexus as an opportunity to expand their influence by mastering non-psychic methods of travel and communication that are unaffected by the warp. Conversely, species that rely on psychic resonance, such as the Tyranids and Orcs, may be driven into even more frenzied aggression as they seek to overwhelm nullified zones with sheer biological and physical force. The cultural impact of the Nexus is equally profound. The very concept of null space challenges the galaxy's fundamental myths and beliefs. For many species, the warp is not just a tool, it is an intrinsic part of their understanding of existence. The complete suppression of this force calls into question the metaphysical assumptions that have defined galactic civilizations for millennia. Some Imperial scholars argue that the Necron mastery of nullification may hint at truths about the nature of consciousness and the soul that humanity is not prepared to confront. The notion that existence itself can be turned off in the way that the warp is severed within the Nexus has sparked theological debates within the ecclesiarchy. Is the soul immutable, or is it vulnerable to the same erasure as psychic power? This question haunts those who have witnessed the Nexus's effects firsthand. In the long term, the Pariah Nexus may force the galaxy to choose between survival and stagnation. A galaxy insulated from the warp would be safer in many respects, but devoid of the innovation and peril that have driven its civilizations to greatness and ruin. Entire ways of life could be lost, and new forms of conflict would arise in their place. The notion of a galaxy silenced from the immaterium presents a chilling paradox: security achieved at the cost of creativity, spirituality, and freedom. Ultimately, the Pariah Nexus stands as a testament to the enduring dangers of ancient technologies and the precarious balance between the material and immaterial realms. Whether it becomes a localized nightmare or the blueprint for a galaxy-wide transformation, its existence has already reshaped the future of every faction. The horrors unleashed by the Nexus may one day be contained, but the questions it raises and the scars it leaves behind will endure, influencing the course of history long after the last battle is fought.